So it is first thing in the morning. We are in Bay St. Lawrence right now at the wharf. And loading up the boat behind me, Northern Tip Charters is taking us out. Now that we're starting the 2.5-hour boat trip, let me explain what's going on. We are on our way to St. Paul Island. It's located 24 kilometers off the northern tip of Cape Breton Island and is the northernmost point of Nova Scotia. Normally people aren't allowed on the island, but we obtained special permission to go ashore and camp there because of the work that we were doing for the Canadian Wildlife Services. I'm a freelance adventure photographer and content creator, so I was there to film the island. Chris and Lee are the other 2 members of the film crew, and a scientist and member of the Unama'ki Institute for Natural Resources completed our group of 5 being left on the island. I've been wanting to explore St. Paul Island for years and became especially interested in its dark history while working as a guide on Sable Island, the only other island in the region more dangerous than St. Paul's and has the title Graveyard of the Atlantic. Although Sable Island has been the cause of over 350 shipwrecks, it's different from St. Paul's in almost every way. It's an island of shifting sands located several hundred kilometers off the coast of Nova Scotia and is best known for the hundreds of wild horses that call it home. Contrary to popular belief, the horses did not come from shipwrecks. They were purposely put on the island by a merchant in the 1700s, and the original horses are believed to have been those seized from the Acadians. Okay, back to St. Paul Island. That's where we're headed. As we got closer, we decided to take the long way and go around the northern tip of the island to see as much of this mysterious place as we could. St. Paul Island is actually made up of 2 islands, the large main island and a tiny second island on the northern tip that's separated by a narrow channel called the Tickle. There are 2 lighthouses on St. Paul Island. This one on the small island is known as the Northeast Light. At one time, there was a suspension bridge across the Tickle connecting the 2 islands. It was built in 1912, but only lasted 7 years before a storm washed it away. It was replaced with a box suspended from a cable that a person could sit in and pull themselves across. But like so many places on this island, it has a tragic story associated with it. In December of 1955, the weather was too rough for the Christmas supply ship to land in the Tickle, so its captain agreed to try and land at another spot on the main island. The Lightkeeper, named George Gatza, was eager to get 2 Christmas packages he'd ordered for his wife, who was pregnant with their first child. As George and the assistant keeper were crossing the Tickle, the cable snapped, dropping them both into the rough, frigid waters below. The assistant lost consciousness before being swept by a large wave onto a rock ledge where he was able to scramble to safety. But George Gatza was not so lucky. The currents around St. Paul Island are strong, and he was swept out to sea. The assistant radioed the supply ship, who immediately began searching for him, but his body was never found. This is Atlantic Cove, the site of the old radio and life-saving stations, and one of only 2 spots on the whole island where it's possible to land. So this book was written by a kid who grew up on the island, and so this picture on the front cover is that ruin right there.
I got the back here. You just put it on the... Just wait till we got another oar for you, just in case. See you tomorrow.
See you later, man. I got the food here.
There you go. We'll be hungry, not you guys.
Although the cliffs in Atlantic Cove are among the smallest on the island, getting ashore is not easy and is only possible in good weather conditions. After Chris and Doug scouted the best landing spot and took a few loads of gear, it was finally time to set foot on St. Paul Island. And it was going to be barefoot since I forgot my rubber boots. St. Paul Island.
It just goes to show you though, right? Like, I mean, this is the easiest place to land. Probably not today, but it's still...
Yeah. Landing was tricky because the motor on the dinghy kept coming loose, and there are many sharp rocks in these waters, both above and just below the surface. Between the camera gear, scientific equipment, and camping supplies, we also had a lot of gear that needed to be brought ashore and hauled up the cliff. Due to the difficulty of getting supplies on the island, there used to be a landing with several buildings and a boom used to get the semi-annual supply drops ashore back when the station was operational.
There goes our ride, and it'll be back hopefully on Wednesday to pick us up.
I say hopefully because the weather is notoriously unpredictable here, and there's a real chance it could turn for the worse and prevent us from getting off the island. We even had to pack several days worth of extra food just in case that happened. After lunch, we decided to do some exploring and follow the old overgrown tractor road that was once used to transport supplies to the Southwest Lighthouse. The remains of the old sundial from the era of the life-saving station still stands at the edge of the forest. A former radio operator described the island as being covered in a very dense jungle-like growth of trees. During our time here, we would find out just how accurate that description is. A strange thing about the forest here is that it grows in these distinct hedges. I've never seen anything like it anywhere else in Nova Scotia.
Oh, right into the water.
Oh no!
Oh man, that sucked.
Guess you didn't hear what I heard.
No, what'd you say?
Don't step right in.
Oh. Did not hear that at all.
We came across the remains of a small building that stood at the reservoir where those that lived here used to get water. We spotted some seals and birds in the water below the cliff we were on, so we stopped to film them for a while.
Oh, there he goes.
As much as we wanted to explore more, darkness comes fast on these short fall days, and we soon had to start making our way back to Atlantic Cove. The plan was to capture drone footage there, so we needed to make sure we still had enough light when we got back.
So right here, this is the ruins of the building where the boom used to be, and that's how they got supplies onto the island. Just getting back to Atlantic Cove now, where we have set up camp. And in this cove here, there were some shipwrecks that were pretty bad. One in particular where it was a ship full of Irish immigrants. I believe they were on their way to Quebec. And they wrecked and a lot of people died, hundreds actually. So there are unmarked mass graves somewhere in this cove here. No one knows actually how many people are buried on this island because there was over 200 years where the island wasn't monitored, so there was no one living here to record the shipwrecks, but they estimate that it's well over 1,000. There are a ton of shipwrecks. A lot of the landmarks actually on the island are named after the ships that wrecked there.
With the last remaining daylight, we decided to check out the last building partially standing and the other ruins on the hill above our campsite.
So this behind me here is what was called the governor's house, and I believe that multiple families of wireless operators used to live here.
People lived in Atlantic Cove for over 100 years, patrolling the island for shipwrecks, rescuing people when they could, and burying the dead when they couldn't.
Is this like two separate houses?
I think multiple people lived here. Like, different radio operators and their families.
Although nowadays called the Governor's House or Mansion, the actual Governor's House is no longer standing, but can be seen in these old photos. This partially standing house was built in 1914, first to house members of the life-saving crew and later the radio operators and their families. The life-saving station was established here way back in 1832 after years of public outcry over the ever-growing number of shipwreck fatalities. The lighthouses were built 5 years later, bringing even more workers to the island. In its heyday, there were quite a few people living on St. Paul's. A lobster canning factory on the other side of the island also employed around 50 people for several months of the year. The island even had a school, a post and telegraph office, and regular mail service back then. The radio station opened in 1924, and the life-saving station closed the following year.
Nope. Pretty flattened.
The radio station remained operational until 1955, then leaving the Lightkeepers and their families alone on the island.
This was day one, pretty much. Tomorrow I think we're gonna try and go back the way we were going today. We ran out of daylight, so we had to head back. But yeah, tomorrow I think we're gonna try and make it to the lighthouse in the south, which is at the end of that road.
The lighthouses remained operational until 1991, when the Northeast Light was the last lighthouse in eastern Canada to be automated, ending almost 160 years of continuous human presence on the island.
Good morning from St. Paul Island. It is another extremely calm day, which none of us were expecting. This place is known to get some pretty wild weather, so it's kind of crazy that 2 days in a row we have this really calm, like no wind, the ocean is flat kind of weather. So we're here a couple weeks after Hurricane Fiona hit Cape Breton, which was one of the worst hurricanes to hit the island in recent memory. I think we're probably one of the first people to come to St. Paul Island after the hurricane, and you can see the impact that the hurricane had on the island. So look here. These cliffs are pretty high, and you can tell that the ocean came all the way up and went all the way over there. There's a buoy on the land over there. And there's places where it just ripped up trees, and there's a lot of down trees as well. The hurricane would have been crazy out here. I would have loved to have seen some footage of these waves coming up because, like...
One thing that really hit me after seeing these unforgiving shores up close is how terrifying it would be to get shipwrecked here. For some very unlucky souls, experiencing a shipwreck wasn't even the worst part of their encounter with St. Paul's. The ship Jessie was traveling from Prince Edward Island to England when it wrecked here during a snowstorm on January 1st, 1825. 23 people managed to survive the wreck by making it up the icy cliffs, but they may have eventually wished they hadn't. This was before the life-saving station, so they were alone on the island. Not long after they wrecked, pack ice moved in, surrounding the island and making it impossible for another ship to reach them. The survivors lit big fires to signal for help, which were seen by the people living in northern Cape Breton, who could only watch on helplessly from afar while the pack ice remained. The agonizing suffering and eventual death of the crew from starvation and exposure was recorded in the journal of the ship's owner, Donald Mackay. He was one of the last to die, and his final entry was made on March 17th, 11 weeks after the wreck. The story of the Jessie gained notoriety when, in the fall, Donald Mackay's widow, who did not yet know what had happened to him, met a man on the street in Charlottetown wearing what looked like her missing husband's coat. She pulled open the jacket to find her husband's initials that she herself had sewn into the lining. The man, a fisherman from Shetty Camp, was arrested and eventually let go after explaining to police that he had gone to St. Paul Island to salvage from shipwrecks and found the coat. The tragic fate of the Jessie was one of the reasons the life-saving station was finally established. The place where the Jessie wrecked is now called Jessie's Cove, very near where the Southwest Lighthouse would eventually be built. After doing some morning filming in Atlantic Cove, we set off along the tractor road again, this time with the goal of reaching the Southwest Lighthouse. The road is only about 3 kilometers long, but it's pretty slow going because it's completely overgrown. I've done hundreds of kilometers of bushwhacking in the Cape Breton Highlands, and the woods on St. Paul are definitely the most difficult and slow to move through. There's a story that before Confederation, the governments of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick both established life-saving stations on opposite sides of the island. Neither crew knew the other was there, and because moving around the island is so difficult, it was months before they discovered each other's presence, which just so happened to be in the aftermath of a shipwreck. Only one sailor managed to survive the wreck and winter conditions to make it to the Nova Scotia station in Atlantic Cove. When the Nova Scotians followed his tracks to the wreck, the New Brunswick crew was there and both were shocked to learn of each other. The Nova Scotians, who were very low on provisions after a replenishment shipment never came, learned the New Brunswick station was stocked with a whole year's worth of supplies. But the New Brunswick crew refused to share any provisions, only offering to take over care of the wreck survivor. The sailor refused to go with them, saying that since the Nova Scotians rescued him, he'd share their fate, whatever that may be. A few weeks later, with provisions about to run out, they launched a small rowboat in a desperate and dangerous attempt to reach the settlement at Cape North. But a big storm hit not long after leaving the island, and they were at the mercy of the storm all night, being blown far off course. Luckily, they ended up near Ingonish, where they were all rescued by lobster fishers the next day. Part of an old sink. We stumbled upon the foundation of a building at Whistle Point, named after the fog alarm station that was once here. This former building was likely the residence of the keeper. The steam-powered fog whistle began operating here in 1872, and on foggy days would blast for 5 seconds every minute. It was often mistaken for another ship's whistle by mariners, so it was replaced by a foghorn installed at the Northeast Light in 1911. Nearby, we also came across what was left of a small bridge for the tractor. We then reached an impenetrable section of forest where the only option was to try and skirt it by climbing up the side of Croghan Mountain, the highest point on the island. We realized we didn't have enough daylight to make it to the lighthouse and back, so we diverted to the top and by chance found the ruins of a World War II radar station. It was part of an anti-submarine early warning system and was built in 1944. It was only operational for 1 month before being closed down for the winter when the channel iced up. By spring, it became apparent that the war in Europe was winding down, so it never reopened, leaving the tower and operations building beside it to fall into ruin. The only other notable feature on the island's marshy plateau are the 2 freshwater lakes, Lena Lake and Ethel Lake. They're named after the 2 daughters of Samuel Campbell, who grew up on the island and became the governor in 1857. His father was governor before him, and his son became governor after, resulting in the Campbell family governing St. Paul Island for over 70 years. After the failed attempt at reaching the lighthouse, we took a different route down Croghan Mountain back to camp. It used to only take about a half hour to walk from Atlantic Cove to the Southwest Lights when there was a clear path. With how grown in it is these days, it would take hours. Lee tracked our route on his watch, and our pace was less than 1 kilometer per hour. Took my boot off, and this is how much debris from the day is in there. We swapped stories about our days with the science crew during supper as darkness fell over Atlantic Cove. The island had a different, eerie feeling about it this evening. There are many reports of the island being haunted from those who lived and worked here. One Lightkeeper's wife even wanted to leave the island because so many unexplainable things happened in their house at night. It started misting after supper, so we all went to our tents early. I spent the rest of the evening reading a book about St. Paul Island and discovered some chilling information that made the night feel much, much more eerie. We awoke to the island shrouded in a thick fog, conditions that used to be the cause of many shipwrecks here. Last night, the thousands of lives lost in these tragedies were on my mind after reading this. Directly in front of, and beginning some 50 yards from the large dwelling house, lies a fairly flat stretch of land whose width reaches to the beach at Money Rocks. Although only one item in the story of shipwreck and suffering associated with the island, here are the graves of over 400 Irish immigrants whose ship met her doom on these shores about a century ago. It is said that in order to bury the dead with the greatest dispatch when they were found in the spring, long trenches were dug and a sort of wholesale burial was carried out. As I was reading that while lying in my tent last night, it was quite unsettling to realize that our tents were almost exactly where the book described these mass graves to be. Money Rocks, which is just beside our camp, was a location where bodies would frequently wash ashore after shipwrecks. And with at least 28 wrecks happening in Atlantic Cove alone, there are many unmarked graves here. Another line in the book reads, "The land surrounding Atlantic Cove would be but a huge cemetery if stones marked all the graves that are scattered here." We were hoping the fog would lift in order to get some more drone footage, but there were no signs of that happening. Instead, I spent some time looking in what's now woods to see if the old fog alarm cannon was still around. I didn't find anything, so went to closer examine the ruin of the landing building. I found some Moosehead and Schooner beer cans and a few old 7-Up glass bottles under the floorboards. Time for exploring ran out sooner than I wanted, and it was time to start packing up camp. The boat soon appeared out of the fog, and we had nice calm seas for ferrying gear. Although, had the conditions been too rough, I would have happily stayed longer to keep exploring more of this fascinating place. Lee had some pack rafts that we ended up using to get some of us and the last of the gear off the island, since the dinghy didn't have a motor this time. We began the 2-hour trip back to Cape Breton, and not long after leaving Atlantic Cove, spotted a rusty old piece of fog whistle equipment on the rocks at Whistle Point. Most of the island was still hidden in a thick fog, though. It's easy to see how the frequent fogs that plague these dangerous shores have caused so much death and destruction. The ship Sovereign, wrecked in 1814, 202 dead. The ship Palace, wrecked in 1856, 82 dead. The ship Monarch, wrecked in 1823, 65 dead. In 1834, there was one foggy 24-hour period where 3 ships wrecked on the island. Many of the passengers were thankfully rescued by the life-saving crew that day. But the following year, 4 ships wrecked in a single stormy night, killing over 200 people. Those examples are about a fraction of the hundreds of shipwrecks we know about, and the likely many that we don't. As we passed beyond the southern tip, the whole island quickly vanished into the fog. It would be our last sighting of St. Paul Island because when the fog lifted everywhere else, it alone remained fog-bound and its treacherous shores almost invisible, further showing why this was one of the most dangerous islands in all of North America. In 1953, the French fishing trawler Victoria became the last official shipwreck on St. Paul Island, the last entry in the long and dark history of the graveyard of the Gulf. While doing research for this video, I came across so many other wild stories that have taken place in Nova Scotia, so if you're interested in more Nova Scotian stories like these, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.